Well, thanks everybody for joining today. I know that we have met in the past to talk about EHP requirements for the BEAD program. Since that time, we've definitely been provided some more information from the NTIA and have gotten some more clarity around exactly how this process is going to work. So we want to share some of that with you. If you could skip to the next slide, Maggie. The agenda for today will be for Carolyn and I to introduce ourselves to the group, to cover the different objectives that we have for the slides and the presentation today, which will focus as agenda item number 3 highlights on identifying the permits that are required for your projects, and then navigating the EHP and NHPA activities that will be required as a result of the requirements associated with these funds. And then we'll open up the floor for some Q&A. Maggie, if you could skip to the next slide. So hi, everybody. I do know, I think most of you, my name is David Luker. I'm a partner at RSM, certified public accountant by trade, but have spent the last 15 years working as an advisor to large government infrastructure projects. Have a pretty good bit of experience working with clients in the permitting area, including evaluating both state and local governments' permit and plan review processes, in addition to helping some of our clients navigate the permitting process like we're doing here. So Carolyn, if you wouldn't mind, a quick introduction.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm the new face on the team. I'm really pleased to be here with you all. I am a director at RSM on the government services team, but I did a career in state and local government before coming over to the consulting side. So I was responsible for signing some of those permits at the local level that y'all have to get. So I'm excited to walk through this with y'all today. As David mentioned, we're kind of, continuing the conversation that we had before. We're still at a fairly high level. We know that there are questions and concerns, consternation, anxiety from all of the stakeholders in this process now across the country, not just in Vermont and not just here on this webinar today. And so we do want you to ask questions. If you have questions while David and I are going through the slides, feel free to put them in the chat. We are capturing them. You could also wait till the Q&A and send them there. We won't be able to answer every question today. During this webinar. We will be able to answer every question, but not the ones that you asked during the webinar, during this webinar. And we understand that there's such a wide variety of projects that we really want to be able to not give you general or generic responses to your question, but we also don't want to have to do all the back and forth so that we get you the right answer during the webinar. So feel free to use the chat. Don't be discouraged if there's not a response that comes back from you in the chat. We are going to capture them, and you will all get your questions answered, either as a result of a follow-up from this webinar or as we go through the technical assistance that we are committed to providing each of you throughout this process. So back over to David.
Excellent. Thank you. Maggie, if we could skip. Okay, I'm going to try to simplify our objectives here. So I really think that the first and primary objective is for you guys to all understand what your responsibilities are coming out of this process. And really, we can break that down into 2 very simple things. It's getting all of the permits that are required, and then providing information to navigate the NEPA and NHPA approval processes, which we'll talk about, will be handled through what is referred to as the ESAPT tool. But really, the 2 primary objectives are obtaining the permits, which will be the APIAT tool that Carolyn talks about, and then the categorical exclusion and/or EA/EIS determination process, which is NEPA approval, which is ESAPT. So APIAT and ESAPT, I think, are really the 2 main takeaways I want everybody to leave with. And obviously, we also want to share what our role, the state and RSM's role is in this process. As you know, and as we talked about last time, the state is a joint lead agency in the permitting process, which puts additional requirements and responsibilities on the state for helping you, the subgrantees, navigate the permitting process. So we want to try to communicate effectively what we will do proactively to engage with you and help you and support you through the process. And then lastly, to really try to focus on the documentation, the specific information that you're going to have to provide through this process, some of which is still in limbo, I'll use the word, as we'll talk about in a bit. Some of the final production environments of these tools are not available yet. In the case of the ESAP tool, so we do have an example of that was used in the demo environment that we all tested. And so there's links that we can provide to that information. However, it's subject to change when the actual ESAP tool goes live, which we anticipate also hopefully coinciding with the approval of final proposals, which I'm sure is really the biggest next step to accomplish for people to feel like they really can move forward with these projects. So I know I didn't read verbatim what these objectives were because I wanted to try to communicate what I really, practically speaking, want you guys to get out of the time today. So Maggie, if we could move on to the next slide. So this is a slide that you guys will probably remember from the first time we talked about permitting. You provided the first 3 items, kind of the critical acknowledgments of your understanding of the requirements in the proposal process. And now, as the team has kind of circled and highlighted this, now we are here where it's time to really start engaging in the activities necessary to obtain all of the required permits for your project and/or consultations, reviews, etc. I wanted to highlight here that I know because final proposal still hasn't been approved and we don't have grantee agreements in place, I'm sure some of you are thinking about how much do I invest, how much do I need to invest in these activities now before that agreement. As you know, you are allowed to perform certain limited permissible activities, which we have a slide next that explains those. And those limited permissible activities are, to the extent that your program is structured in a reimbursable way, those can be compensated for. However, without an agreement in place, you are obviously participating at risk in those activities. And so that's really a judgment on behalf of each ISP, at which point you really start to invest engineering and other technical resources in this process. So these are the list of limited permissible activities. This comes directly from the general terms and conditions of the BEAD program that you can look up yourself. I think it's section 13E. Don't ask why I have that memorized. But just wanted to highlight that and make sure that there was some clarity around what can be performed now, whether or not that's reimbursable, and really, want to encourage you guys to study these activities because these are the only permissible activities. Ground disturbing activities are not permitted until the NEPA approval has been obtained from the NTIA, which is facilitated by that ESAP tool process, which we're going to talk about in more depth in slides to come. Maggie, if you could skip to the next slide, please. So we have a couple of what I'm going to refer to as obvious slides here that are really already, these were produced by the NTIA. We're really just presenting these back to the group to try to drive home the point around the complexity of the potential clashes and permitting requirements of projects like this. And so in this slide, all I really want to use this slide to do is highlight some of these specific agencies that we need to be thinking about and thinking about with respect to the Appiate tool and the different layers that you're going to be required to evaluate those potential clashes with your project. So FHWA is listed here, private households, private property, municipal roads, tribal land, which should not be an issue for our project areas here in Vermont, the Bureau of Land Management. So just highlighting the complexity of the way these builds are engineered and the different structures that they go over and under and around, and thinking through the responsibility to identify every single one of those and make sure that every activity that's performed out in the field is under a permit or the appropriate permissions to perform that activity. Maggie, if we could skip to that next slide. I did want to highlight, this is a very similar kind of obvious slide to the last, but there were a few things I wanted to point out on this slide. In the federal column here, there is reference to the State Historic Preservation Office, the SHPO Section 106 consultation. Due to the way that this program has been structured, the feds have allowed the states to engage in direct consultation for Section 106. And so each state, including Vermont, will be engaging in this process proactively on behalf of our grantees, and grantees will be pulled into that process if and when necessary to provide additional information to complete the Section 106 consultation. Another thing I wanted to highlight on here was the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Section 7 ESA consultation. So there's a tool called the IPAC tool that the state will also be facilitating the upload and provision of information into the tool related to your project, and will facilitate the back and forth with that consultation with Fish and Wildlife directly. So not something that grantees need to initiate, but something that the state will initiate and then pull grantees into those conversations. But generally speaking, this listing on the screen here provides you some other thoughts to drive home that concept of how complex your projects can be because of the ground that they cover, and to reinforce the requirement to make sure that every foot of your project is permitted, and that the NEPA process, which does include a requirement to have the Section 106 and the ESA Section 7 consultations completed prior to the NEPA approval process. So no work is going to happen with any of these other permits until the NEPA process is complete. So if we could skip to that next slide, because I think this is the great transition where we can start to really get practical with what this process looks like. So I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn to talk about our work in the Appiate tool, your work in the Appiate tool, as well as some details about ESAPT and what to expect from there. So Carolyn, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks so much, David. And I know we had people join after we started. And so I wanted to make sure that we reiterated sort of how we want to deal with questions. And I just saw one go in the chat. So thank you, Krista. We want to capture all of the questions that come up from this entire webinar. And so go ahead and put questions in the chat. We will have a time at the end, but all the questions that go into the chat, we will capture. If we can address them at the end, we will. If we can't address them at the end because we don't have complete information, or we need a little bit more time to give you a good answer, we will absolutely follow up. And we don't necessarily want to give any off the cuff advice or half advice as we're going through this process because you caught us during the webinar. But our goal here is to get everyone to the end and everyone to project construction. So that's what the starting point for today. So as much as this looks like Appiate, it is the Appiate tool. And this is the ArcGIS tool that NTIA has developed for all of you. And if you haven't downloaded the NTI permitting and environmental information project package yet, this is your chance. The goal here is this tool includes all of the layers that the NTIA is assuming that you as a subgrantee and as an ISP and as a construction company building this infrastructure will need to determine which permits or reviews you'll need to have complete, or at least have talk to an agency about to make sure that your project is meeting all of the state and local permit requirements that you've agreed to follow as you go through the project. The way that this is intended to be used is that all of the subgrantees download the tool and then complete the guided tasks to be able to understand which are the permits or which are the consulting agencies that you'll need to talk to. And when you do that, Maggie, if you go to the next slide, you will get an output like this. And what this is showing you is the layer that your project is conflicting with, where it's conflicting, and then the likely agency that you will need to consult about that. Now, you may have familiarity of this and you know that it's a private road in a town that you've worked in a long time, and you know that there's no permit for that road. That's okay. You've worked with VTrans a lot on your projects, and you know how to get right-of-ways for the US highway system facilities, and you know what you're doing. But I think this was meant to make sure that all users had equal information, understanding where there are clashes or conflicts or intersections of your project and these areas. And so this is really what each of the Appiate users is starting with as you think about putting together that complete list of permits and reviews that each of your projects will require. Go on to the next slide, Maggie. We've done some of this already. And so what we were able to do is the final line drawings that you've provided to VCBB at this point. We have downloaded we have the Appiate tool, and we've done the initial clash detection. And for each project, you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, we've taken, you as an ISP and maybe one of your projects or all of your projects, depending on what your portfolio looks like for your preliminary awards, and helped to identify where the clashes are. And we've separated that in between between kind of two big groups. One where we believe a permit is what we need to inquire about needing, and the other is where we believe that there is a review process that will need to be inquired about having. And then helping each ISP for each project understanding just the number of clashes. So if you were, overlapping with a VTrans facility, that could just be one facility in many locations, or it could be different facilities in different locations, just depending on the size and scope of your project. And our goal here is to make sure that we're sharing a complete picture basis we understand it. And then make sure that you have a link to all of the agencies that you'll need for those reviews or those permits. And if you go to the next slide, the other part of the information that we're providing for each of you is the contact information for, as best as we can tell, the relevant agencies. I think that we will this will be some exploration that happens together. So you'll bring your initial analysis and the list of permits and environmental reviews that you're anticipating, or reviews, not just environmental reviews, and we'll have our list. We're going to meet one-on-one. And then we're going to spend time making sure that we're contacting the right towns. We've got the right historic region that we're making the inquiry about. And then also that if we need, to understand what the submission materials are, how we put together those submission materials, and then what the timelines are for submission, and then what the compliance requirements are. So each of you is going to get, you'll get several slides if you have more than one project, a slide if you have one project, and this should help get you started and help you be able to compare what came out of your Appiate analysis or any other work that you have done to make sure you understand what the reviews and permits are going to be for your project. So go on to the next slide, Maggie. So the next tool, I'm really, as someone, I want to know who at NTIA works on these acronyms and the names of these. I keep calling ESAP something different. So if you ever see it with two P's and one T, you know that I typed it. But the Environmental Screening Permitting Tracking Tool for BEAD was very specifically developed for you. It was developed for each of you because this is meant to streamline the otherwise somewhat complex and Byzantine list and network of reviews that have to happen for infrastructure projects that go across as many jurisdictions and cover the ground that the broadband projects funded by BEAD do. And so this tool has like took into account all of the streamlining and all of the cooperative agreements that are happening between federal agencies that you all as BEAD applicants get to take advantage of. So this really was meant for VCBB to use for tracking each of your projects. And it's a Salesforce platform, and it's meant to identify, as it says right here, all of the places where you don't need permits. So those categorical exclusions, or if there's no effect on a wetland, or there's no historic preservation impact, it's helping get us to yes, and to the fewest number of permits that you will need. But it is going to require that VCBB uploads responses to a whole slew of questions, as you can imagine. Many of them have logic in them, if then, yes, no. And so what we'll be providing along with VCBB is a questionnaire for you to fill out. Some of that information, as we'll see on the next slide when we get there in a sec, comes out of the clash detection. And so that's why we are putting a lot of emphasis on the clash detection so that it streamlines the inputs that VCBB and RSM will need for the ESAP tool. And so, but sometimes there'll be supplemental documentation. Sometimes there will be memos that have already been created for VCBB and they just need to be uploaded with your entry. And what it creates at the end is basically shows the approval that these are what we agree, the permits that you need. And then it helps put together a milestone and timeline, Gantt chart, schedule, whatever, whatever format or name you want to call it, so that all of the permits can be tracked in an organized and sequential way. I'm sure many of you worked on projects where that's so great. I got my building permit, but I haven't got my excavation permit yet, so I actually can't start anything. So the goal here is to make sure you get the excavation permit before you get the other permits, or if you need easements or those types of things for construction and for staging, you get them ahead of when you need them. And so really making sure that not just that all of the permits are getting applied for and complied with, but that the timing and the sequencing of those permits makes sense for construction. You can go to the NEPA for BEAD website and explore some about this tool. As David mentioned, this is a screenshot from our user training, but the tool is not live yet for VCBB or for RSM to really be able to provide you all of the detailed information that we wish we could right now. We are just waiting for that tool to go live so that we can explore it and so that we can be better about providing technical assistance to each of you. And we will be ready to provide that technical assistance. We just aren't able to answer every question right now. Go on to the next slide, Maggie. So this is an Excel right now, but you can see that we are putting, based on what we know from the tool that was available for demos and user testing, were put in here. And the goal here is that you've done your clash detection between us, VCBB, and your teams. We've already agreed on largely these are the permits that we're going to need. This is the area that we're covering. These are the clashes that we're going to have. And that information will get inputted into this questionnaire. In some cases, there'll be supplementary documentation that also needs to be uploaded. In other cases, we might not be able to close out one level of the questionnaire to the next because we're waiting for information from an agency. But generally, the goal is that we'll get this this questionnaire out to you, and we will be providing technical assistance one-on-one along the way until the questionnaire is complete and until we have a schedule for each of your projects. And these are for the federal permits. David also mentioned earlier, I just saw this one said federal permits and reviews. We have the state and local permits too. And so we will have to put those two things together so we have a full picture of all of your permits as we go through the process. Go on the next slide. So for those of you who can do it orally, for those of you who are visual learners, this is the process chart that NTIA has provided to us on what's going to happen. And so this is where we have the project information is provided to VT-BEAD. We upload that information to create the record. Then the responses to the questionnaire will help us understand that you look at the second, so there's no CADX apply, so then you would need to do more analysis and review, or what that the CADX do apply, and then we're sort of right into your approval process. So I do think that this was just one way to help you understand what the ESEPT tool is doing. And you can think of the APAT tool as being to the left of this, and you can think of your final schedule and milestone Gantt chart, if you will, being to the right of this in terms of the work that has to happen. And then go ahead to the next slide. What we really want to emphasize now is that if you are downloading the APAT tool project package and you are starting to see that there are large parts of your project that are going across wetlands or around riparian zones or along, significant highway rights of way that maybe were just rebuilt or repaved, that you consider your project, consider your project routes if you can. So the first best management practice from NEPA is that you design your project to avoid as many federal permits as you can. And then when you can't do that, you really want to make sure that you're either minimizing the impacts or that you're only having the impacts where you know that the mitigation is reasonable, affordable, in scope with what you're doing. And so as you're doing any of this work, we really want you to download and have open on your computer the best management practices and mitigation measures. This is the best way for any and all of your projects to get through the process with the fewest permits, the least amount of cost, the least amount of unused time or missed opportunity time, so that we really make sure that we get every project to construction start as soon as you were anticipating, and then obviously construction end as has been agreed to in your perspective, or as you've agreed to as you applied for this program. So before we kick on to the questions, we've got next steps here, and this is what we wanted to, go ahead, Maggie. So what we're really hoping you can do is download the project package and begin to identify class locations. We talked about the list of things that you're allowed to do before award. Maybe you want to grab your most complex project, or maybe you want to, work on the one that covers the larger amount of area, or maybe is the closest to a sensitive area that you've been concerned about. Then you're going to generate that list of draft permits and permits and reviews that appear to be, from your perspective, required for construction. Then you're going to review the best management practices, and then we get to that point, we'll be consulting with you. So we're going to get to that area, that time where you have your list of required permits and reviews, and we have the ones that we've demonstrated, so that we can begin to compare and understand what all the steps are going to be for you or VT-BEAD, depending on the need to do, so that you're ready for all of these upon award or right after award.
Thanks, Carolyn. Well, I know that was a lot, which is why I tried to start it by distilling it down to these two key tools and their functions. Without awards, without final production environment of the ESAP tool, we do realize that there are a lot of things still in the air right now that we may not be able to address or answer currently. But we want to make sure that you guys all walk away knowing that we're going to be reaching out to have a meeting with you to talk about what clashes came out of our work and to collaborate on your list of permits, your corresponding analysis, and the next steps that we need to move forward collectively to get these permits obtained and to get the NEPA approval completed through the ESAP tool. So hopefully this helped towards that end, but happy to open the floor for any comments or questions that you guys might have.